The bunker smelled like brine and hot metal. Tamsin Larch pressed her ear to the door and counted. 17 seconds between each wet step. The Merathi patrol moved through the flooded street above, their stride a rhythmic suction against broken pavement. 16 seconds now. They were circling back. She held her breath. The emergency lights cast everything in amber, turning the faces behind her into masks. 43 civilians pressed against the far wall. Some cried, most just stared at nothing. 2 bodies lay outside, left behind when the door sealed. She could still see their shapes through the small viewport, dark mounds in the murky water. The footsteps faded. 15 seconds, 14. The interval was shrinking. Tamsin turned from the door and walked toward the back of the bunker. Finian Hale hunched over the work table, his thin shoulders curved around something that glowed faintly violet. Sweat traced a line down his upper lip. She stopped beside him. The beacon sat on the metal surface, a crystal the size of her fist, dark gray with veins of violet that pulsed without rhythm. Finian had found it in a collapsed pre-FTL structure 3 weeks ago. He kept it because it was warm. It was warm now. She could feel the heat from 3 feet away. "It's cycling," he said. His hands never stopped moving, hovering, adjusting, never quite touching. "I don't know what activated it." The violet veins moved faster than Shed ever seen, a slow crawl across the gray surface, a pulse that had no pattern she could track. "It feels like it's listening," Finian said. Tamsin looked at him. He was 28 years old and scared of everything. He talked too much when he was afraid. He wasn't talking now. That worried her more than the patrol. A child coughed somewhere in the bunker. The sound was small and wet, a crack in the silence. A woman's voice tried to hush it, frantic and low, but the echo traveled through the corridor. Tamsin saw the woman's face go gray. They all knew what the sound meant. Sound traveled in water. The Merathi heard everything. The grinding noise started 30 seconds later. Tamsin moved back to the door. She pressed her palm against the cold metal. The grinding came from the outer seal, a high-pitched whine of cutting tools eating through reinforced alloy. The Merathi had found the entrance. Behind her, the civilians pushed back against the far wall. Someone started praying. The language was unfamiliar, a chant that rose and fell with the rhythm of the cutters. Tamsin did not recognize the words, but she recognized the shape of surrender. She walked back to the table. Finian's hands were still. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It was not fear, it was something closer to acceptance. "Give me the beacon," she said. He shook his head. Tamsin, no. "Open the inner door." The grinding grew louder. The outer seal was almost breached. Finian's mouth opened, closed, opened again. She did not argue, she just looked at him. The voice that came out of her was flat and tired. "Open the door, Finian." He held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he looked away. He reached for the control panel and pressed the sequence. The inner door groaned and slid open, revealing the corridor beyond, darkness and the smell of damp concrete. Tamsin took the beacon. The heat pressed against her palm, alive and insistent. The violet veins pulsed faster the moment her fingers closed around it. She walked into the corridor. The door closed behind her, a heavy seal that cut off the sounds of the bunker. She was alone in the dark with a piece of technology that should not exist, holding it like a shield she did not know how to use. The outer door tore open. 3 Merathi stepped through the breach. Their combat gear gleamed wet in the emergency lights. Their gill slits flared in the dry air, 4 vertical lines along their ribcage that opened and closed with a soft clicking sound. They smelled of wet cloth and iodine. Their skin shifted through deep greens and blues, pigment responses she could not read but understood well enough. The lead Merathi raised a weapon. It was a sleek curve of metal and ceramic aimed at her chest. "Drop the artifact," he said. The voice was wet, a resonance that came from deep in the chest. Standard, heavily accented. He spoke it like a command he expected to be obeyed without question. Tamsin did not drop it. Her hands were shaking. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to run, to go back through the inner door, to hide with the others and let the Merathi take the crystal and leave. But her legs did not move backwards. She felt the fear. It was there, sharp and cold and real. It filled her chest and made her breath shallow. But it did not control her body. Her fingers stayed wrapped around the beacon. Her feet stayed planted on the wet concrete. That discovery was worse than the fear itself. She realized she could run. She realized she would not. The knowledge sat inside her like a stone, heavy and permanent, a choice she had already made without knowing she was making it. "I said drop it," the Merathi said. The weapon did not lower. Tamsin said nothing. She held the beacon in front of her chest and waited. The Merathi officer made a sound, something between a click and a hiss. He exchanged a look with the soldiers behind him, then he fired. The capture net hit her at chest height. It wrapped around her body and the beacon together, a weave of synthetic fiber that tightened the moment it touched her skin. She fell backwards, hit the concrete floor, lost her breath. The beacon pulsed. The light was violet and bright, and it threw shadows on the walls of the corridor. The crystal burned against her palm, even through the net webbing. She felt it resonate, a deep hum that vibrated through her bones and into the floor beneath her. The Merathi soldier stopped. He looked at his wrist display. The screen flickered, casting blue light across his face. His pigment shifted, a ripple of pale color that she could not interpret. He turned to the soldiers behind him and spoke in his own language. The words were wet and guttural. She did not understand them. But she understood the tone. It was not anger. It was not surprise. It was something closer to recognition, followed by something that sounded like fear. The beacon was still broadcasting, and something out there was answering. The water in the air hit Ilthea's breathing slits like a memory of home. The command vessel floated in high orbit above Last Cut, its interior a controlled echo of the Merathi deep. Bioluminescent panels pulsed overhead, slow and circadian, casting the bridge in shifting tones of indigo and violet. She barely registered them. The capture footage played for the 7th time. Tamsin Larch stood in a flooded corridor, water to her knees, a dark gray crystal clutched against her chest. 3 Merathi patrol soldiers faced her, weapons raised, orders given. The human did not drop the artifact. Her hands shook. Her breathing was shallow and fast, but her legs did not move backward. She stood there waiting as the corridor seal closed behind her and cut her off from whatever she had been protecting. Ilthea played it again. There, the micro-movement on the 7th playback. A slight shift of weight onto the balls of the human's feet. A preparation for movement, not surrender, not freezing. The human had been deciding something. Keithrin of the First Tide stood beside her, his pigment a dark, impatient green. He had been watching her watch the footage for nearly an hour. His breathing slits fluttered with barely contained irritation. "You are fixating on a malfunction," he said. Ilthea did not look away from the screen. The human's eyes were dry and focused. That was not a malfunction. The subject failed to comply with standard surrender protocols. Keithrin's voice carried the flat certainty of a tactical coordinator who had seen 6 species break. The artifact should have been dropped. The subject should have raised empty hands. Instead, it stood there. That is a failure of threat response, a flaw in the nervous system. Ilthea's pigment shifted, a slow purple bloom that she could not suppress. "We do not know that." Keithrin turned to face her fully. His shell harness creaked with the movement. "We know exactly what we saw. The human was afraid. It was afraid and it did not submit. That is not courage. That is broken programming." Ilthea said nothing. She let the clip play once more and watched Tamsin Larch stand in the water and wait. Selkir of the subtle current did not look up from his station. The data keeper's pigment was a pale gray, barely visible in the low light. He had been running spectral analysis on the beacon signal for 3 hours. His voice came out flat and tired. "It matches nothing in our archives. Not Merathi, not Indari, not Skarath, not even the stray frequencies we picked up from the Nohan incident." Ilthea turned from the footage. "Then what is it?" Selkir gestured at a waveform display that cycled in a pattern Ilthea did not recognize. The oscillation had no clean harmonic. It was jagged, almost organic, but not biological. The signal appears to be answering something. Ilthea felt the water in her lungs cool slightly. Answering what? Unknown, Selkir's fingers hovered over the display. The reply source is not localized. It is not in system. It is not in this sector. We are receiving an echo from somewhere outside mapped space. The beacon is broadcasting to a listener we cannot identify. Keithrin stepped closer to the display. His pigment darkened further. "Secure the artifact in the isolation vault and bring the human up for interrogation. Standard pressure collaring protocols. Prepare the frame." Ilthea's breathing slits fluttered. She did not move toward the door. She asked if she could examine the human first, outside the interrogation frame. Keithrin's eyes narrowed, denied. Ilthea still did not move. The silence between them stretched. She could feel the rhythm of the bioluminescent panels above her, the slow pulse of artificial tide. She said, "I want to understand what we are dealing with before we break it." Keithran studied her for a long moment. His pigment settled back to its normal dark green. He said, "You have 1 hour. Then the interrogation begins." Ilthea nodded once and left the bridge. The holding bay was a sealed compartment near the lower hull, pressurized to Merathi standard. The bioluminescence was dimmer here, a deliberate choice to reduce stress on captives. Ilthea stood at the polarized window and looked through at the human inside. Tamsin Larch sat on a low bench, her hands resting on her knees. Medtechs had dried her skin and run basic biosign scans. She was still wearing the gray civilian clothes from the bunker, torn at the shoulder, stained with brine. A thin cut ran along her forearm, already clotted. She was not restrained. Ilthea watched her. The human's eyes moved slowly across the room. She studied the ceiling panels, the seal around the door, the vent grill near the floor. Her breathing was steady but shallow. Her hands did not tremble. Ilthea accessed the biosign data on her wrist display. Blood pressure was elevated, heart rate high. Cortisol and adrenaline markers were well above the threshold that would trigger a Merathi chemical shutdown cascade. The human body had no such cascade. There was no biological off-switch for threat response. Ilthea checked the anatomy files again. She was not wrong. She pulled up the neural map from the bioscan. Pain centers were active, bright and hot on the display. The human was in significant distress, but the motor cortex was also active, engaged, planning. The pain signal was not being suppressed. It was being processed, evaluated, sorted into a priority queue. Ilthea lowered her hand and stared through the window. She had studied 70 species. She had read the anatomical files of more than 200. She had watched death rituals from 12 different biospheres. She had never seen a nervous system that treated injury as information instead of a termination command. The human was hurting, and the human was still thinking. Tamsin Larch looked up and met her gaze through the polarized window. Her eyes were dry and focused. She did not look away. Ilthea felt her pigment shift, a slow wash of deep violet that started at her throat and spread across her cheeks. This was not a malfunction. This was a different kind of life entirely. The holding bay door hissed open behind her. Keithran stepped through, his shell harness clicking with each stride. "The interrogation begins in 1 hour," he said. "Have you prepared the pressure protocols?" Ilthea did not answer immediately. She watched the human through the window. Tamsin Larch was still looking at her. Her lips moved barely. Ilthea could not read them. She turned to face Keithran. Her pigment settled to a steady blue, deliberate and controlled. "I have a different protocol to suggest." Keithran waited. Ilthea said, "I want to talk to her first, not as an interrogator, as a researcher." Keithran's pigment darkened, denied. Ilthea did not look away. The silence stretched between them, longer than protocol allowed, longer than rank permitted. She held his gaze and waited. Keithran's breathing slits fluttered once, twice. He did not speak. The bioluminescent panels cycled overhead. The water in the air tasted of salt and something else, something Ilthea could not name. She stood in the silence and did not break it. The interrogation chamber had no moisture, none at all. Tamsin's skin felt tight, her lips cracking at the corners. The air tasted of recycled ions and something sharp, something metallic that coated her tongue. She sat on the metal floor with her legs folded beneath her because standing took too much energy and lying down felt like surrender. Keithran stood across from her. His pigment ran dark, almost black in the harsh light. His voice came out flat, a language she understood through a translator disc clipped to her ear. "Your name?" "Tamsin Larch." "Where did you find the beacon?" She rolled her shoulders. The muscles there ached from tension she had held too long. "I don't know what you're talking about." Keithran's breathing slits fluttered. It was the only movement he made. He asked the same question again, same words, same flat tone. She gave the same answer. He asked a third time. She said nothing. Keithran reached for a control disc on his belt. He pressed a sequence. The collar around Tamsin's neck hummed and tightened. The ring contracted against her skin. Cold, precise. Then the pressure began to build, not a squeezing force but a weight, a steady push against her throat from every direction. Her airway remained open, but each breath now required concentration. Each inhale felt like pulling air through a heavy cloth. Her body understood the threat before her mind caught up. Her heart rate climbed. Her hands wanted to fly to her neck. A signal fired through her nerves, raw and ancient, telling her to fight or flee. She did not move. She had been pinned under rockfall once, a collapsed tunnel on a survey job, 2 hours of air in a trapped pocket, the weight of a mountain pressing on her chest. She had learned something down there. Panic burned oxygen. Panic killed faster than the thing you feared. She breathed slow. The pressure climbed. Her vision began to dim at the edges, a gray curtain drawing inward. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She let it happen. She watched it the way she had watched the rock dust settle in that tunnel, knowing the signal was noise and the noise was not real. 40 seconds. Keithrin leaned closer. His pigment had shifted to a mottled green, something she had not seen before. The collar has a 3-minute cycle, he said. Most species break before 1 minute. You are not being brave. You are being stubborn. Stubbornness has a cost. She did not speak. But she looked at him. Her eyes were clear. His breathing slits fluttered again. He looked away first. 90 seconds. The gray at the edges of her vision deepened. Her lungs ached for more air, but she refused to let them dictate the rhythm. In, hold, out, slow. The collar vibrated against her throat, a low hum she felt in her teeth. Keithrin checked his wrist display. His fingers hovered over the control disc. 2 minutes, 10 seconds. One of the guards shifted his weight. The movement was small, but it broke the stillness. Keithrin was no longer watching her. He was watching the timer. From the back of the room, Ilthea stepped forward. Her skin rippled from pale silver to a fast, rolling deep blue. She said something in Merathi. Her voice was low, but it carried. Keithrin did not deactivate the collar. Ilthea reached past him and pressed the release sequence herself. The pressure vanished. Tamsin drew a full breath. The air rushed into her lungs, cold and sharp and beautiful. Her throat burned. Her hands shook where they rested on her knees, but she was still sitting upright. Her spine was straight. Keithrin turned on Ilthea. His pigment surged dark. He spoke fast, a stream of syllables the translator disc did not render. Ilthea answered in the same clipped tone. She did not step back. Her pigment cycled through warning colors, a cascade of blue and violet that rippled across her skin. They argued. Tamsin watched them. The collar's safe cycle was 3 minutes. They had stopped at 2 minutes and 37 seconds. She knew this because she had been counting. Her heartbeat now sounded loud in her ears, a drum that filled the silence between their alien words. Keithrin's pigment shifted to black. He said something final. Ilthea's breathing slits contracted. She did not answer. They left the chamber together. The 2 guards remained. They stood against the far wall, their hands resting on their equipment. They did not approach her. They kept their distance. Tamsin sat alone on the metal floor. She reached up and touched the collar. It was still locked around her neck, cold and humming faintly. The beacon was gone. They had taken it during the transfer, pulled it from her hands while she was still disoriented from the surface-to-orbit transport. Finian was still in the bunker with 43 civilians and no clear exit. She had no plan, but she noticed something about the guards. They did not come within arm's reach. They positioned themselves at the far edge of the room, one on each side, their eyes fixed on her. They were not watching her with contempt or curiosity. They were watching her with calculation. They were treating her like something dangerous. The pressure collar had not broken her. The alien who stopped it had been afraid of her, not for her. That distinction sat in her chest, solid and cold. Tamsin ran her thumb along the collar's edge. She had no weapon. She had no allies in this room. She had nothing but a piece of information the Merathi had just handed her without realizing it. She was still sitting upright, and neither guard would step closer. The research bay hummed with the low thrum of scanning equipment, a sound that settled in the bones. Water condensation beaded on every metal surface, catching the pale blue light from the specimen tanks lining the walls. Ilthea's own algae culture sat in a small tank near her workstation, its green and sharp smell cutting through the sterile air. She was alone with the human. The door was locked. No guards inside. Tamsin Larch sat in a medical recliner. Restraints held her wrists and ankles, but no collar pressed against her throat. Her hands lay still on the armrests, fingers relaxed. She watched Ilthea with a calm that did not match her situation. Ilthea approached slowly. She kept her pigment steady, a neutral light blue, but she felt the flutter in her breathing slits and knew she was failing to hide her agitation. She spoke first. "I want a full bioscan series. No restraints beyond the chair. No pain induction." The data will be anonymized and used only for academic purposes. Tamsin's crooked nose had been broken years ago. Ilthea had seen the scar tissue in the initial medical report. The human's eyes tracked her every movement. She did not blink. Tamsin said, "You think I am a new species?" Ilthea did not correct her. She moved to the scanning console and began the sequence. The machine powered up with a rising whine. A thin beam of focused light swept across the recliner, mapping tissue, bone, electrochemical pathways. The data built on the display in layered streams: neural pathways, endocrine clusters, pain receptor density. Ilthea watched the numbers climb and her breathing slits fluttered faster. She had never seen a configuration like this. The human's nervous system was dense, networked, redundant. It looked less like an organic structure and more like a deliberately engineered system built for sustained operation under catastrophic failure. She asked the question before she could stop herself. "What does pain feel like to you?" Tamsin shifted slightly in the restraints. The motion was small, controlled. She said, "It feels like pain." Ilthea pressed. She needed to understand. "Do you experience a pain ceiling, a point where your body refuses to continue?" Tamsin was quiet for a moment. The scanning beam traced across her ribs. She said, "Sometimes. When the damage is bad enough, the body shuts down. Muscle failure, shock. But the brain does not stop. The body can still move if the brain tells it to. Pain is just a message. You can choose to ignore a message." Ilthea ran a comparative simulation on the console. She mapped the human nervous system against a Merathi baseline. The numbers appeared side by side, and she stared at them for a long time. The difference was not in receptor count. Both species had roughly the same density of pain receptors. The difference was in the processing pathway. Merathi brains routed pain signals through a dedicated alarm center. That center triggered an automatic retreat response. It was a hardwired loop. Pain meant danger. Danger meant withdrawal. The system was elegant and efficient. Human brains routed pain signals through the same region that processed external sensory data. Sound, sight, touch, pressure. Pain was not a special case. It was just another input. The human brain could override the alarm because the alarm was never a separate system. It had always been just a signal among signals. Ilthea stopped the scan. The machine fell silent. She sat down across from Tamsin, close enough to see the thin scar along the human's jaw. The light from the specimen tanks cast shifting patterns across both of them. Ilthea said, "This trait does not have an evolutionary purpose. It is too costly. Too many humans should have died from ignoring injury in pre-medical eras. This should have been selected out." Tamsin shrugged. The gesture was small within the restraints, but unmistakable. She said, "Maybe it was not a disadvantage. Maybe the ones who kept going were the ones who survived long enough to pass it on." Ilthea had no answer. She had studied dozens of species. She had classified hundreds more. Every single one had a pain ceiling, an automatic shutdown, a point where the organism chose survival over action. It was the fundamental equation of biology. Damage meant retreat. Retreat meant survival. Any species that broke that equation should have died out generations before developing civilization. She looked at the scanned data again. She saw the neural architecture of a species that evolved to push through damage. She saw a biology built for persistence, not evasion. She whispered, "You are not supposed to exist." Tamsin heard her. The human's voice was quiet, almost gentle. She said, "We do anyway." Ilthea had nothing to say to that. She sat there for a long moment, the smell of her algae culture filling the space between them. The condensation ran in slow streaks down the walls. The scanning equipment hummed its steady, constant note. She moved to the console. She deleted the scan logs. The data vanished in a single command, wiped from both local storage and the ship's network. She turned back to face the human. She said, "You are being transferred to a holding facility on the homeworld." She did not say that the transfer was illegal. She did not say that Keithran had ordered execution, not transport. She did not say why she was disobeying a direct tactical command from a superior officer. The words sat in her throat like stones. Tamsin watched her. The human's hands remained still on the armrests. Her face showed nothing, but her eyes tracked every shift in Ilthea's pigment. Tamsin said, "You know they will find out." Ilthea stopped at the door. Her hand hovered over the release panel. She could feel the cool metal through her skin. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing against her chest, a pressure that had nothing to do with the water in the ship's atmosphere. She said, "I know." The door opened. Ilthea walked through it. The command deck hummed with the low vibration of engines, a constant thrum that Keithrin usually found soothing. Today it sat beneath his bones like an irritant. The holographic display dominated the center of the room, a thread of violet light that stretched from the beacon's last known position into emptiness. The signal path curved, then straightened, then vanished into the black. At its end, nothing, no star, no relay, no mapped territory. The reply signal came back at regular intervals, 43 seconds between pulses when he had first checked. Now it was 31 seconds. The gap was shrinking. Arvith of the subtle current stood at her command station, her pale silver pigment catching the violet glow. She had not spoken in 8 minutes. She did not need to. Her silence was a question, and Keithrin felt the weight of it pressing against his spine. The human female knelt at the center of the deck, restraints locked around her wrists and ankles. She was younger than the one Ilthea had studied. Her face was round, her hands calloused with dirt still crusted under the nails. She wore a woven tunic stained at the collar. A farmer. She did not speak their language, she did not speak standard. She looked at the deck plates and breathed through her mouth short, shallow pulls of air. She was terrified, she did not scream, she did not beg, she simply waited. Keithrin turned to face Arvith. The beacon signal path pulsed behind him. The situation required explanation. He gave it in plain terms, the way he always did when the data demanded clarity. The beacon was responding to something outside known space. The reply signal was accelerating. Each response came faster than the last. The pattern was not random. It was a handshake protocol building toward a handshake. He believed the artifact was a communication relay for an intelligence the Merathi had never encountered. He believed the humans had found it buried, activated it without comprehension, and triggered a countdown no one understood. Arvith listened. Her pigment did not shift. She said, "What do you want to do?" Keithrin's pigment darkened. A green-gray flush, the color of deep currents under pressure. He had been thinking about this since the echo first appeared on his display. The human biology was the variable. Ilthea's data confirmed it. Their nervous system processed pain as ordinary sensory information. They endured what should have broken them. If their biology was uniquely resistant to damage, it might be uniquely suited to interface with technology designed for a similar tolerance. He wanted to attach the beacon to a live human subject and observe the interaction. Arvith's pigment went still. Not paler, not darker, absolute stillness. She looked at the farmer. The farmer looked back. The farmer did not understand the words, but she understood the silence between them. Her breathing changed, not faster, slower, each breath measured, a body preparing for something it knew was coming. The silence stretched. Keithrin waited. Arvith gave no permission. She simply did not refuse. He took that as authorization. He gave the order. A technician approached with a carrying tray. The beacon sat on it, dark gray, the size of a human fist. Violet veins lined its surface, pulsing without rhythm. No visible power source, no mechanism, just that slow internal glow like something alive and patient. The farmer watched it approach. Her eyes tracked the crystal. When the technician knelt and tried to place it in her hands, she resisted. She did not scream, she pulled back. Her arms strained against the restraints. She twisted her body away. One guard grabbed her shoulder. The second pinned her arm. The farmer bit down on her own lip. Blood ran down her chin. She did not make a sound. 2 guards held her down. The technician forced her fingers open and pressed the beacon into her palm. The violet veins pulsed once. The farmer went still. Her eyes stayed open. Her body went cold. The life left her like water draining from a cracked vessel. No spasm, no cry. She was simply gone. She was dead before Keithrin could say stop. The word sat in his throat, unvoiced, useless. The technician pulled the beacon from her hand. The crystal was undamaged. The violet glow continued, steady, unhurried. The reply signal on the display pulsed again. 30 seconds, 29. No one moved. The farmer's body lay on the deck. Her eyes were still open, staring at nothing. The dirt under her nails caught the violet light. Keithrin looked at her. He had killed before. He would kill again. This was not combat. This was not occupation. This was a test, and the test had failed, and he did not know why. The deck door opened. Ilthea of the Merath Deep stepped through without permission. Her pigment was pale, almost white, the color of shock. She looked at the dead human on the floor. She looked at Keithrin. She did not speak. He realized then that she understood these creatures better than he did. She had been inside the data. She had seen the neural pathways. She had watched the other human endure the collar and refused to break. She knew something he had not thought to ask. He hated needing anyone. He needed her. The silence pressed against him. The beacon hummed, the display pulsed, 28 seconds. Kithrin turned to face Ilthea. His pigment stayed dark, the color of anger and something else, something he refused to name. You will help me understand this species. It was not a request. Ilthea looked at the farmer's body. She looked at the beacon. Her pigment shifted, a slow gradient from white to pale blue, the color of decision. I will help you understand them, but you will not touch another human without my approval. Kithrin's pigment darkened further. The words coiled in his throat, ready to refuse. He was a tactical coordinator of the First Tide. He did not answer to analysts. He did not answer to anyone. Arvith spoke from her station. Approved. The command deck went quiet. The vibration of the engines filled the space. Kithrin did not turn to look at Arvith. He looked at Ilthea, her pigment held at pale blue. She was waiting. He had been overruled, not by a superior, not by a rival, by a scholar who had watched a human die and had not flinched. The beacon hummed, the display pulsed, 26 seconds. Kithrin said nothing. Ilthea held his gaze, and Ilthea realized, in the space between one breath and the next, that she had just become responsible for every remaining human within Merathi reach. She did not look away from him. The lights are wrong, full spectrum, designed for eyes that filter through water. Tamsin has been blinking against the burn for 6 days now. She learned to squint on day 2. The condensation drips from a pipe seam near the ceiling. Plink. 14 seconds between drops. She counted everything. Door cycles, guard rotations, the number of times the child coughed in the night. Finian is thinner. They brought him in 2 days ago, shoved through the hatch with the rest of the survivors from the lower habitation block. He found her in the corner and sat down without a word. His hands are still moving, drawing shapes on his knees. Ilthea visits without permission. That is clear from the way her pigment flickers, deep indigo bleeding into violet, then back. Her breathing slits flutter. She stands at the observation window like she is deciding whether to enter. The door opens, she steps inside. The other humans shrink back, 37 of them now from last cut and 3 other settlements. The child with the cough is still alive. That is something. Ilthea speaks first. Her voice carries the wet resonance of her species, words formed in a throat built for pressure. There was a test. A farmer, young, female. They put the beacon in her hands. Tamsin listens. She does not interrupt. The farmer resisted, bit her lip, would not open her hands. Guards forced her fingers open. The beacon pulsed once. She died. Instantaneous. No pain response recorded. The signal continues. Tamsin waits. The room is quiet except for the drip. Plink. Where is the body? Ilthea's pigment darkens. Disposed of. Standard protocol for non-Merathi casualties. Tamsin nods. Her face does not change. Finian speaks from the corner. His voice cracks. What happened to the beacon? Kithrin has it. He is waiting for instructions from the Federation Council. Ilthea's hands pressed together, a gesture Tamsin has learned means uncertainty. The council is divided. Some want the beacon destroyed. Some want it studied. Some want to contact whatever is on the other end of the signal. What do you think, Finian again? He is looking at Tamsin. Tamsin says nothing. Ilthea moves closer. Her pigment shifts to a pale blue, the color she uses when she wants to appear neutral. I can get you off this station. You and Finian. A transport leaves for neutral space in 3 days. Research vessel. Merathi registry but Federation oversight. The captain owes me a favor. Tamsin looks at the children. At the woman who was praying in the bunker. At the man with the broken arm who sets his own bones because the Merathi will not give them medical supplies. What about the others? Ilthea's breathing slits still. I cannot save everyone. Tamsin does not respond. Finian stands. He steps toward Tamsin. His hand finds her arm. We should take it. We can find help. We can come back. Tamsin looks at the children again. The smallest one is asleep against her mother's chest. Her face is slack. She looks peaceful. She looks like she has forgotten where she is. I am not leaving them. Ilthea's pigment darkens again, a slow flush of deep purple. Then stay. Stay and let me study you. Stay and let me prove to the council that humans are not a threat. Tamsin laughs. It is a dry sound, hollow, scraped from a throat that has not made that noise in days. You want to prove we are not dangerous. You showed us to your commander and he killed a woman for touching a rock. You are not going to convince them of anything. Ilthea has no answer. Her pigment cycles through colors, searching for the right response and finding nothing. Tamsin stands. She walks to the door of the holding bay. The metal is cold against her palm. Condensation beads on the surface. She feels the weight of the room behind her. 37 people who cannot leave, one man who could and will not. She does not turn around. You study us because you think we are strange. Her voice is flat, measured, but you are the ones who stop. You stop when the pain gets too high. You stop when the odds get too bad. You stop when the cost gets too high. She turns, she looks at Ilthea. We do not stop. That is not courage. That is just how we are built, and you have no idea what that means. Ilthea's pigment has gone pale, almost white. Tamsin steps closer. You gave the farmer to him because you thought she was a sample. She was not. She was a person, and she died alone, surrounded by creatures who did not even know her name. The silence stretches, the drip marks time. Ilthea leaves, the door seals behind her. Finian is the only one who could have left, and now he will not. He sits down against the wall. His hands are still. For the first time since Tamsin met him, his hands are completely still. The beacon signal is still broadcasting. She does not know how she knows this, she just does. The reply intervals are shrinking. 11 seconds now, maybe 10. Finian looks at her. His voice is quiet. Whatever is answering that thing, it is getting closer. Tamsin sits down against the wall. She rests her head on the metal. She feels the vibration of the station, of the ship, of the void pressing in from all sides. Good. She closes her eyes. The drip marks the seconds. The signal travels. Something is coming. The alarm had been silent for the last 40 seconds. Tamsin stood at the transparent barrier and watched the void beacon pulse. The violet veins moved in a rhythm that matched her heartbeat now. She could feel it in her teeth, a low vibration that had nothing to do with the deck's engines. Ilthea worked the console beside her, pigment flickering through shades of deep blue. The reply stream scrolled across her screen, a ribbon of symbols that refused to resolve into anything the Merathi translation banks could parse. The interval was less than 1 second, then it was nothing. The reply signal stopped being a pulse. It became a continuous thread of data, complex and layered, folding over itself in patterns that hurt to follow. Ilthea's breathing slits fluttered. She ran the same analysis 3 times and got the same result. Tamsin said, "It is not a language, it is a key." Keithran stepped closer, his dark green pigment almost black in the low light. "Explain." "The beacon is not a transmitter." Tamsin pressed her palm flat against the barrier. The warmth bled through. "It is a lock. The signal from outside is the key. When the two match, something opens." Ilthea's voice came out thin. "She is correct. The dimensional resonance frequency has stabilized. The beacon is no longer broadcasting. It is receiving. No, it is accepting." The violet veins pulsed faster. The crystal grew warm, then hot. Tamsin could see the heat haze rising from the pedestal. Arvith spoke from her station, her pale silver pigment flat and unreadable. "Eject the beacon into deep space. Use the emergency launch tubes." Keithran turned. "Commander, we have a stable lock with an unknown intelligence. This is the first confirmed contact with something outside mapped space in Federation history. We cannot simply—" "Eject it." Arvith's voice did not rise. It did not need to. "The object is a security threat. The protocol is clear. Get it off my ship." The deck crew moved. 2 Merathi in pressure harnesses approached the console that controlled the containment field. Keithran's pigment darkened to black. He looked at Ilthea for support. She gave him nothing. Tamsin stepped forward. She put her hand on the barrier. The surface was warm now, almost too hot to touch. She did not pull away. The barrier was rated for explosive decompression. It could stop a kinetic impact at close range. She could not break it. She did not have to. "Do not eject it." She kept her voice flat, the way she had learned in the tunnel collapse when screaming cost oxygen. "Let it open." Keithran almost laughed. The sound came out wet. "You have no idea what is in that signal. It could be a weapon. It could be a species that consumes star systems. It could be something we cannot even classify." Tamsin did not look away. "Neither do you, but it has been calling for 6 days. It could have attacked already. It has not. It is waiting." Ilthea's pigment shifted to a pale lavender. She ran a probability analysis, then ran it again. Her hands trembled over the console. "The odds of the signal being hostile are inconclusive," she said. "The odds of it being autonomous and non-sentient are higher. The data packets show no command structure, no targeting protocols, no encryption. The beacon is not a weapon. It is a question, and something is answering. Arvith hesitated. It was a small thing, a fraction of a second, but Tamsin saw it. The pale silver pigment flickered just once. "What do you think the question is?" Arvith asked. Tamsin put her forehead against the warm barrier. The heat soaked into her skin. She closed her eyes. "I do not know," she opened them. "But I think we have been alone in this galaxy long enough. Let us see who else is out there." The silence stretched. Arvith looked at the beacon. She looked at Tamsin. She looked at the signal thread on Ilthia's screen, the continuous ribbon of data that had traveled from somewhere no Merathi ship had ever reached. She said, "Cancel the ejection order." Kithrin made a sound, a small protest that died before it became words. Arvith said, "Ilthia, open the containment chamber." Ilthia's hands moved across the console. The barrier retracted with a soft hiss, sliding into the deck plating. The air changed. It smelled of ozone and old stone, the scent of something that had been buried a long time. The beacon sat on its pedestal. The violet veins surged and receded in a rhythm that matched Tamsin's pulse exactly. She reached out and took it. The heat was deep. It spread up her arm into her shoulder across her ribs. It was not painful. It was like drinking something hot on a cold day, warmth that filled spaces she had not known were empty. The violet veins climbed her skin. They spread across her forearm, her wrist, the back of her hand, living circuitry that pulsed in time with her heart. She watched them move, and she did not flinch. Ilthia stared. Her pigment had gone white, the color of shock, the color of something she had no category for. The human held the thing that should have killed her. The signal lock completed. The deck went dark. Every console went silent. Every light dimmed to nothing. The hum of the engines cut off. The environmental system stopped. The only light in the room was the violet glow of the beacon in Tamsin's hand, the veins of light that crawled across her skin, the soft pulse that filled the space where sound had been. Then the comm system activated. A voice spoke. It was not standard. It was not any Merathi dialect. It was older than that, older than any language in the Federation database, older than the records of the founding species. It was a sequence of sounds that should have been meaningless. Tamsin laughed. The sound was raw. It came from somewhere deep, somewhere that had been waiting for this moment without knowing it. She laughed, and the laughter shook her shoulders, and she did not stop. Ilthia said, "What is it?" Tamsin held the beacon up. The light cast her face in purple shadows. "I know that language." Kithrin's pigment rippled. "Impossible. That signal predates human spaceflight. Your species was in the industrial stage when that transmission was first broadcast." Tamsin looked at him. Her eyes were dark in the violet light. "We were here first." The voice on the comm paused. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats, 4. Then it spoke again in a new language, flawless Merathi, perfectly inflected. It said, "We thought you were extinct." Tamsin held the beacon. The warmth had settled into her bones, a steady heat that felt like home. She did not answer. She did not need to. The signal spoke for her. It said, "We do not go extinct. We wait." The silence that followed was the longest silence in the room. No one moved. No one breathed. Kithrin's pigment had frozen at a gray so pale it was almost translucent. Ilthia stood with her hands suspended over the dead console. Arvith had not moved from her station, but her eyes were fixed on Tamsin, and something in her expression had changed. Everyone on that deck knew. The balance of power in this part of the galaxy had just shifted. And it was not in their favor. The voice on the comm spoke again. It was softer now, almost reverent. "Where do you want us to begin?" Tamsin looked at Ilthia. She looked at the civilians still locked in the holding bay. She looked at the purple glow that traced her skin like a promise. She said, "Tell me what you know first, then I will tell you what we need."